Hi, good afternoon. I'm Joe Swartz from American Hydroponics. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to talk about biological pest control. Insect and disease pests are some of the biggest challenges facing growers today. So it's very, very important to understand what's going on in your greenhouse and find better ways to deal with them. One of the most common questions I get from people is, what is this in my greenhouse? Or why do I have this big patch of dead plants? So what we really need to do is first talk about the importance of being very involved in your greenhouse and scouting and every day doing a daily check. We're here today in the Humboldt County Office of Education greenhouse. This is a high school greenhouse training center for students at the Humboldt County Office of Education. And it is a student-run entrepreneurial operation. And this is also where we hold our AmHydro 2-day seminars. So this is a working greenhouse. It's a training and research facility. So what you see here is a wide variety of crops where students are not only learning to grow, but they're also learning, doing research for different varieties, pests and insects, and understanding the biology of all that. So there's a lot going on in this greenhouse. By and large, though, we don't want to see pests and we don't want to see diseases. But we're going to show you a few of those today, and we're going to talk about strategies without using pesticides to deal with them. So, as I said, on a daily basis in your greenhouse, it's very, very important to go through your crops and check. So as we see here, all of our nursery plants, this is one of the most vulnerable times for insect and disease infestation. So it's very, very important, not only on a daily basis to check your plants, to look underneath, to check for the presence of anything unusual, insects, diseases, etc. But it's also very, very important when you're transplanting or handling the plants to understand what's going on. So it's very important, if you're not doing it yourself, is to train people who are working for you to look for things that are unusual and be able to identify them. So insect pests are, of course, one of the most important challenges that growers are facing. So it's very, very important to understand quickly how to identify what you may have in your greenhouse, but also what to do about it. So as we go through our greenhouse tasks every day, we may notice certain insects. So when we do, there's a lot of resources online for identifying insects. As part of our grower training program at AmHydro, we do tutorials on insect and disease identification, which is very, very important. But it's critically important at an early stage to know what's going on in your greenhouse. So let's talk about just some of the most common insect pests that you may deal with. One of the most common is the aphid. The aphids are universal across all climates, all regions of the world. And they're most common in leafy greens, but we do sometimes see them in tomatoes and peppers and fruiting crops as well. So it's very, very important to understand what aphids look like. As you can see on the screen, you see the aphids, both the adult, which tend to give live birth, which means that they replicate very, very quickly. And they tend to cluster. And one thing to know about aphids is they tend to cluster on the undersides of leaves. So during your inspections on a daily basis, it's very, very important to be able to look not only on top, but underneath on the bottom sides of your leaves. Many different insects will congregate on the undersides, and they're not commonly seen until they rise to epidemic levels. We don't want to see them. So aphids are very, very common. We have certain strategies we'll talk about in a minute to deal with aphids, but we'll move on to the next, the most common insect pests, and those are greenhouse whitefly. And tomato growers and pepper growers tend to see these all the time. Again, these will congregate on the undersides of the leaves. One of the differences, though, these are flying as adults. So when you're moving through your crop and you brush the crop, we tend to see them flying and moving around. So they're a little more obvious in terms of seeing them, but usually when we see them, they're already adults, meaning there's a lot of larvae and young on the undersides of the leaves damaging your plants. So if you don't see them until the white flies are flying around, you're a little bit late to the game. So it's real important, and we have some strategies to deal with the greenhouse whitefly as well. Next are thrips. Thrips, again, like aphids, are pretty universal. We see them all over. We see them on the upper sides and on the undersides of the leaves. They're very, very tiny. We almost never will actually see the thrips themselves. If you look at the picture on your screen, that's actually thrips damage. The thrips themselves are almost microscopic in size. So we have to learn to identify not only what the insects look like, but the damage that they cause and how to look for that. Lastly, or second to last, we also have the leaf miner. This is very, very common for growers of floral crops, also tomatoes. This very, very distinct pattern of this squiggly line that moves around on the leaves. This is actually a fly that lays its eggs into the leaf tissue, and then it's basically the larva eating its way through the leaf tissue. These can cause a significant amount of cosmetic damage, so it's very, very important to identify them and to treat them quickly. And lastly, spider mites. These are also one of the most common. Now, keep in mind that this is not the only list of insect pests that you'll deal with, but these are the most common and cause the most economic crop losses. And as you can see from the photograph of the spider mites, one of the most telltale signs is this webbing and leaf distortion that comes with a spider mite infestation. Again, spider mites are almost impossible to see, so we have to learn to identify their presence through either their webbing or the damage that they cause. So there's a couple of strategies that we like to use. This is specifically for pesticide-free growing, with some growers choosing to use organic standards or completely beyond organic, what we call pesticide-free standards. It's very, very important to understand what tools we have available to us. So what we tend to like to use mostly are different beneficial insects to battle the, we like to call them the good bugs and the bad bugs. And so for the beneficials that we use both predators and parasites. So the first photograph that we're seeing is the ladybug. This is one of the most common and universally known predators. Basically, these will eat just about every insect pest known to man. They're commonly brought into greenhouses to deal with aphids and other infestations. These are predators. They will aggressively go out and basically eat the aphids or other insects whole. So they come right in and they eat them. That's one common, fairly very universal insect that are used. One of the more effective long-term strategies that we like to use are using what are called parasites. And so what these do is they tend to search out the insect pests, and they lay their eggs inside the bodies of the insect pests. And so while the insect pest is still alive, they're basically serving as an incubator for our beneficials. And so it slowly kills your insect pests and breeds more of the beneficials. We're always in a greenhouse environment where we're not using pesticides. We're trying to maintain a very active ecosystem. With what we call the bad bugs, we want to keep a good population of the good bugs. And there's a number of products that we can use to bring into the greenhouse. So these are just two of the very common insect parasites that we like to use. So for the aphids that we talk about, very, very common this is called aphids. And these are actually a very, very tiny wasp. And they're shipped in a mixture of bran, and the small pupa of these are actually shipped. And so if you can see some of the light colored bran, then you see dark spots. These are actually the aphids. And these are shipped to you in a refrigerated package. So they're basically dormant. So when you bring them out to your greenhouse, we have small containers. These are basically just small paper cups. And what we do is we hang them out. And once they're in the warm greenhouse environment, they will develop very quickly. And within 24 to 48 hours, they will emerge. And once they do, they will search out the aphids, and they will begin laying eggs into the bodies of the aphids. So what we'll do is we'll hang this out. It's a very nice, convenient location just to hang them out within the crop. And then, as we say, the aphids will then venture out and start working for you. It's very, very important, though, to understand which insect pests that we're dealing with so we know how to deal with them. Now we're going to move over to the tomatoes really, really quickly, where we tend to see whitefly and spider mites. Now this is Nocilius cucumaris. This is also a small predatory mite. Again, all we want to do is we take a small amount of it. It also comes in a brand carrier. Unfortunately, you can't really see these very, very well, but they will, just like the aphids, they will, in the warm greenhouse environment, they will come out. So what we'll do is we will hang them in various areas around our crop. And some growers also will just simply sprinkle this brand carrier around to the crop. So basically now the cucumaris mites will migrate into the tomato crop, and it will be working for you 24 hours a day. So it's very important in terms of dealing with insect pests to be able to not only identify them and to deal with them once you see them, but also to keep them out of your greenhouse as much as possible. And this is where we want to talk about proper sanitation and good greenhouse practices. Exclusion, of course, is our first line of defense. when we're dealing with insect or biological insect control, it's very, very important to realize we don't have a quick fix. We can't come in and do one thing that gets rid of all of our insect pests. So our first line of defense against any insect infestation is exclusion. Properly run greenhouse all should have insect screening. This is basically on all of the vents where air can come into the greenhouse. They have a mesh screen that excludes most insect pests. This will go a very, very long way. It's a very simple method of keeping as many greenhouse pests out of your greenhouse as possible. Also, greenhouse pests can come in on your clothing, and things like wearing street clothes in the greenhouse at all times sometimes can be problematic. So it's important to have a pair of shoes and maybe other clothes in the greenhouse to wear, so you're not bringing your street clothes into the greenhouse and working and possibly introducing other pests. Here at the HCOE greenhouse, all workers are required to change their shoes, and they have cleanable, disposable shoes to wear. And it's also very, very important to keep a very clean greenhouse. As you see here, the floors are kept clean. No weeds are allowed. I've been in greenhouses all the time where there are weeds growing in the corner. These are excellent vectors for insect pests. So your sanitation practices are going to be very, very important in dealing with both insect and disease pests. So it's very, very important to keep a very clean greenhouse. It's very, very important to be in your greenhouse every day and scouting. Every step of the process, when you're transplanting the crops, when you're harvesting your crops, when you're doing a daily check, you should always look for presence of insects and diseases so you can catch an infestation. Both insects and diseases start usually very, very small, but they can develop and expand very rapidly. So as soon as you can treat, the sooner you can treat these infestations, the better. So those are the commonly used beneficials that we do. These are the practices that we follow for insect exclusion and eradication. We also have biological control of diseases, which is very, very important as well. Most fungal and bacterial diseases cause significant economic losses in greenhouses, and they can be avoided with proper environmental control and proper sanitation. So some of the most common diseases that people ask me about, first and foremost, powdery mildew. This is by far one of the most economically devastating fungal diseases. Again, it's called powdery mildew, and it's very easily identified by white powdery material on the upper sides of the leaves. People will call me and say they have what looks like talcum powder on the leaves. This is a very early stage of powdery mildew. You see individual spots of powdery mildew. What happens fairly quickly, though, as you see in this dill plant, is powdery mildew will spread across the whole leaf surface. What we do is when we see this, we tend to see what looks like this powdery substance that starts on the older leaves and works its way up. Powdery mildew is a fungal disease that spreads very, very rapidly under certain temperature and humidity conditions. So it's very, very important to understand what it looks like and how to keep your crops in the proper growing environment and to eliminate the potential for the disease infection spread. Downy mildew is very similar to powdery mildew. One of the only differences, rather than seeing it on the upper sides of the leaves, you'll see it on the undersides of the leaves. So again, it's very, very important when examining your crop to not only just look at the upper crop surface, but to see what's going on underneath. So when we're looking for insects, we may look underneath and find aphids, which we wouldn't find on the top. The same thing, we may see powdery mildew on the top as a disease, but we won't see downy mildew on the underside of it. Again, very, very important to understand your temperature and humidity, which we'll talk about in a second, but very, very important to catch early and deal with it. And also fungal blights are very, very common in greenhouses. These can be several diseases such as septoria, anthracnose. These are generally fungal, sometimes bacterial diseases that will appear as dark spots on the upper sides of the leaves. So again, once you start to see these, you already have an infection going. So it's very, very important to eliminate or remove any infected plant material and identify it and treat it as quickly as possible. So how do we deal with these diseases? Well, first and foremost, our environmental control is critically important. And understanding the proper temperature and humidity range for our crops is very, very important, because the ideal temperature range and humidity range for our crops in most cases is actually a less than favorable ideal condition for the diseases. What we tend to do is we tend to see powdery mildew get going in the spring and the fall when our greenhouse temperatures may fluctuate too much. when our relative humidity level is too high or when our nighttime temperatures are too low. So these are conditions that you as a grower can eliminate, which will then significantly lower the incidence of some of these diseases. Downy mildew and fungal blights also very, very temperature and humidity related. So keeping your humidity in the proper range, usually in the 55 to 65% range, but again, that's temperature dependent. We could talk to you in future seminars, and also you can call us and we can talk to you about your humidity ranges and the vapor pressure deficit level, which are ideal levels of temperature and humidity for your crops. And it's very, very important to keep the plants in proper levels, which will go a very, very long way. Now, again, as we did with, we talked about with insect infestation, keeping a very, very clean greenhouse, keeping out foreign plant material is very, very important. Every year I have growers that will call about a disease infestation, and they'll happen to offhand mention that they're storing their neighbor's coleus plants in their greenhouse. And what they're doing is they're bringing in insect and disease problems into the greenhouse. So it's very, very important to keep your greenhouse sealed and not to allow any other foreign plant material into your greenhouse. Every week when we harvest, it's very, very important to clean up old material that could vector insects or diseases. It's very, very important to keep control. And some growers who don't use chemical pesticides can use biological materials. There are certain sprays. Bacillus subtilis is a very common. It's an actual bacteria, and it actually will coat the leaf surface and inhibits the growth of some of the other pathogenic fungi and bacteria. So it's very, very important to understand which materials are available to you, and we can advise you on that. Some growers actually use food products like potassium bicarbonate as well, which is known to inhibit powdery mildew. So things like that are all very, very important pieces to your toolbox, if you will, to battle insect and disease problems. So again, it's very, very important to keep good agricultural practices all the way through. It's very, very important to keep foreign plant material out, to keep your greenhouses clean, and to use biological pest control products like this, which we can advise you on. And that is really the foundation for a good strategy for sound biological insect control program, pest control program. So again, it's also very important to scout daily and be able to identify and respond very, very quickly. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that made sense. Please feel free to contact us if you have questions. This is kind of a very short overview of a very large and complex subject, so we can talk more about it. We do talk about it in much greater depth at our Introduction to Hydroponic Crop Production seminars. These are 2-day seminars. We have one coming up here October 26th and 27th. All of the greenhouse portion of the seminar, we have some classroom instruction, and then we have a lot of time in the greenhouse. We're actually in this greenhouse here at the HCOE, so you'll spend time in this greenhouse working with the plants, learning to identify pests and diseases, learning crop production strategies, learning a lot of very, very important information to starting your own hydroponics business. So we really encourage you, if you haven't already, to join it. If you look on the screen, there's information. We also have a special, 2-for-1 special that basically 2 people from your operation can come for the price of 1. And we also have a special that you see on your screen regarding a special for hotel accommodations. So hopefully we can see you in October at that. And we also have an upcoming webinar, which is our next webinar, which is coming up in October. You should see the information on your screen. And we'll be talking about heating, and specifically heating your crops and your seedling system or your propagation system for maximum crop production. As we go into winter months, growers have a slowdown in growth and their revenues will go down. So we want to look at some strategies to keep your crop growth moving at a fast pace, as well as keeping your quality where it should be. So thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate your time. If you have questions, please contact us, and we hope to see you at our upcoming seminar and at our future webinars. So thanks and have a great day.